Good evening, everybody. My name is Mark Bessire, and I'm the director of the Portland Museum of Art. And I want to welcome everybody to the Maine Art Museum Trail Spring 2021 Digital Program Series. Museums are at a moment of reckoning. Immense social, political, and financial pressure is testing the foundations of institutions, prompting examination of history, the need for change in the process to acknowledge, repair, and heal. This spring, the Maine Art Museum Trail is proud to present a digital program series that explores the notion of making a home, and what that means for institutions and the communities they exist within, bringing light to the stories that have not been told and reflect on the changing museum field. Tonight is the first series, and we have actually a series of 4 moments. And I'm not going to introduce the folks just yet. I'm going to give you an idea of what's coming up. On Tuesday, April 20th, we're going to have conversations with Zoe Zalul and Philippa Hughes. Zoe is the founder and executive director of the New England Arab American Organization, and Philippa Hughes is a social sculptor and creative strategist. The next event is on Tuesday, May 4th, a lecture with Malian Dana, and that will be narrated with Chris Newell. Malian is the first individual to hold the position of the Penobscot Nation Tribal Ambassador. And then our last talk, we're going to bring back 4 more museum directors on Tuesday, May 25th. But tonight, to kick it off, the Maine Art Museum Trail Lecture Series, we have Christopher Newell from the Abbe Museum, Amanda Lahikainen from the Ogunquit Museum of Art, Jen Pye, Monhegan Museum and Art and History, and College Goodyear from the Bowdoin College Museum of Art. We thought we'd kick it off with a conversation with these directors to think about the times we're in, all thinking back to that notion of home. And so I think we're going to jump right into some questions and some dialogue, and then we're going to come back and see what you all have in the question and answer section to ask us any questions you may have. So the first question is there an artist or artwork that you've admired from this last year, and why? And I think that first question is going to go to Jen. And we're going to pop up on the screen some of our images to help us out.
All right. Thank you, Mark. So a painting that's meant a lot to me and to our museum over the last year is this wonderful portrait of Jackie Hudson by George Bellows. And the reason why is because it ties into the history of the island, of the art colony, and even the history of our museum in several different ways. And so the story behind the work, I'd like to share a little bit of it, and I'll try to keep it brief. But so Monhegan in 1914, it was the 300th anniversary of Captain John Smith landing on the island. And there were a number of events that were planned that year to recognize that occurrence. And one of those was the first organized art exhibition on Monhegan. And this was kind of the golden age of the Monhegan art colony. You know, we had the Henry School and we had the American Impressionists both painting on the island. And so that particular summer, the group included George Bellows, Randall Davey, Charles and Mary Ebert, Wilson Irvine, Eric Hudson, and many more. But there was sort of a spirit of community and camaraderie among these artists, even though they had very different approaches to making art. And they'd gather at Eric Hudson's porch in the late afternoon and talk. And so through spending time at that Hudson house, George Bellows got to know Hudson's daughters, Judy and Jackie. And that summer, he painted their portraits as his contribution to the art exhibition. So Jackie grew up and she became an artist herself, and she's one of the founders of our museum. And in time, Julie's portrait ended up at the Met, but Jackie's was in a private collection and we weren't able to locate it for years and years. And last April, it was the beginning of the pandemic. We were all working from home, the kids were schooling from home, and we were just kind of starting to realize that this was going to be our new normal for a long time. And I received a phone call from Ed Deasy, who was our previous director and the president of our museum and has been for over 35 years. And Ed was really excited. He was looking at an auction catalog, and there was Jackie. And we'd been looking for her for years, as I said. So the reappearance of this painting was a really bright spot in a difficult time. But to add to this kind of heartwarming tale of Monhegan and community, and this painting coming full circle, we were able to acquire this painting due to the generosity of Steve Fuller and Susan Bateson. And they made this gift in honor of Ed DC, who was a good friend of Jackie's for many years and worked with her closely at the museum. So to see the circle and the tremendous support behind bringing this painting home was really a bright spot in all of this for us.
Great. Thank you so much, Jen, for that great story. And it's such a beautiful painting. I think, Amanda, you want to share your image up now? Thanks.
Thank you. Okay, so what you're looking at here is a work of art by the artist Alberto Rey, and he's going to be featured in a show at OMA, the Ogunquit Museum of American Art, opening July 30th. So he's not on view right away, but mid-season. And he's a Cuban-American artist. And I chose this work of art to talk about today for a lot of different reasons. And I think it encapsulates so many different things and invites us to think about a lot of things at the same time. So this is from a series called Biological Regionalism that he started in 2005. And it's something that he's actually still working on. But let me run, and this is not an exhaustive list, but let me just mention some of them. Ecological sustainability, our connection to nature, native versus non-native species, our connection to place as distinct from space, cultural diversity, which is part of his identity as a Cuban-American artist, immigration and stories about finding a home, right? Because it relates to the theme of this the Maine Art Museum Trail theme here. So there's so many different things that this invites, and I also have to note that this is a salmon. This is related to Alaska. Ray has traveled through a lot of different areas to work on this series, New York, Cuba, Iceland, and he's also coming to Maine. So he'll be doing, in May, he'll be thinking about our biological regionalism and some of the flora and fauna that make, makes Maine so distinct. So this idea of place versus space, I think is really important. And he's really, he's keying into those differences that help our minds bring meaning to a place as opposed to a vast and empty space. And this is one of the things that I think is really important for the Ogunquit Museum of American Art. We have that sense of place, and trying to find a way to articulate that to get people thinking about inside and outside, that there are lots of different reasons to come here where you can find solace in nature, which I certainly did during the pandemic. I know a lot of my staff members did. There's a lot to find here. So I think this is a great work of art, and I wanted to share a quote with you. I actually have an edited volume here. It's a series of scholarly essays discussing Alberto Rey, but it's a good quote. Don't worry, Mark, it's not boring. So the introduction to this volume, it says, this is the quote: "To all those who made their way here to build lives, to those who will come, and to the ones who have gone." And I just thought that was, and I actually had chosen this artist, before I had actually looked in this, and I thought, wow, that's exactly, why we're here. What is it to, to build a home? Maybe one of those things is to be greeted with a smile. So, thank you.
Thanks, Amanda. What a wonderful, wonderful story and a wonderful work of art. And can't wait to see it when you guys open. And when are you guys opening again, Amanda? What's the official day?
May 1st.
Excellent. May 1st. Can't wait. Let's see, Chris, you out there? You want to share with us your choice tonight?
Yeah, thank you so much, Mark, and welcome everybody, and welcome to my fellow panelists here from the Art Museum Trail. Such a pleasure to be with you. Here at the Abbe Museum, there's been a lot of change that's gone on. Of course, it wasn't just the pandemic that caused that. We are known for our decolonization work. And I started last year in March, just a few weeks ago in March, as the first Wabanaki executive director of the Abbe Museum. And I think about, you know, the long history of the Abbey and where we're going now. And, you know, this piece that we have here is not really a visual art piece that we have here. It really kind of goes into the way, as Passamaquoddy people, as the way I grew up, art lives in everything that's around us. And we even see that in, you know, Amanda's example, you know, the beauty of nature and sustainability shown up even in a modern art piece. And so this book that you see here is a new release, just came out, edited by my father. The work is actually, he did a lot of the writing of it, but the book is called Gukmusnuk Algonudamawinagut, which means stories our grandmothers told us. And what this stems from is, as a young man in his 20s, my father understood the value of conserving our history, you know, and especially our oral history, which is an art in and of itself. And, you know, collected, you know, from his elders of his time, the stories of our Passamaquoddy people, you know, all types of stories, humorous, you name it, you know, ones that teach lessons. And this particular book is a collection of that material from 50 years ago. And essentially, you know, he lists himself as edited because he does not take ownership of these stories, because these were given to him as a young person from elders that these stories were given to them. And so he wanted, with the creation of this book, to kind of show how you can incorporate cultural values even in modern day things that we promote, you know, to conserve our artworks, including our language and our stories. And so, you know, this it's a special book in another way, because it's all written in English and in Passamaquoddy. The entire book is. So it's got value beyond just, you know, what we would consider the art world, but, you know, to linguists and others, you know, the value that's in this book is not just in the stories that are told, but in the way that they are told. And that's really a lot of what the Abbey's work is about these days, is really taking the Wabanaki perspective on the arts and trying to unsilo it from the museum and make sure that in our communities, and share it with others in a culturally competent manner. And you know, I definitely would encourage anybody that's interested in Passamaquoddy history to look for this book. You'll be able to find it on Amazon, but more importantly, you'll be able to find it on the Abbey Museum retail store pretty soon. And you know, and Robert Levitt, you see there, he's worked with my father ever since the 70s and worked with our language. He's a non-native person who's actually learned how to speak Passamaquoddy fluently and has worked with our language for quite a long time. So a lot of knowledge put together in this book, and this is hopefully volume 1 of 2. So look forward to the rest of it, because once again, you know, everything in our world is art, and that includes our knowledge. So thank you.
Great, thanks, Chris, and thanks everybody for sharing with us. We've now got Anne, and Anne, are you ready?
I am.
All right, here we go.
Mark, thank you so much for serving as our host this evening, and it's such a pleasure to be here. Chris, Jen, Amanda, with you, and to everybody who has joined us from your own homes. We're so happy that you're with us this evening to be part of this larger conversation. And Mark, when we had an opportunity to speak with you a little bit before this evening's program, I was so happy that you raised this question about what works of art have been most meaningful to us over the past year. And in some ways, it's really hard to settle on just one. We're very fortunate at Bowdoin, and a picture of the museum is in the background of my shot. We're very fortunate at Bowdoin to have an encyclopedic collection that ranges back 3,000 years and comes up to the present day. The collection is actually quite an old one, with the roots of its nucleus stretching back to colonial America. And although our building, the Walker building in which we still reside, was not completed until 1894 and then extended in 2007 with an extension by Mikado Silvetti, art actually has been part of the Bowdoin experience since around 1811, when James Bowdoin, who provided the funds to start the college, donated his collection to the college. So we're always mindful here about the ways in which art does intersect with our everyday lives, and the way in which it intersects with the larger educational mission of the college. And during the course of the past year, as we were all asked to think a little bit about what it meant to be an essential worker, one thing that we all kept saying to ourselves at the museum is really artists are essential workers, and we just benefit in so many ways from the vision that they bring us, from their ability to document what's happening in the here and now, and I think above all, the courage that they give us to keep moving forward when things are really challenging and ambiguous around us. So with all that in mind, and thinking about the events that have shaped the past year, the artwork that stood out to me at this point in time, and one that I have found myself returning to over and over, is a portrait of the activist DeRay McKesson that was created for the Bowdoin College Museum of Art in 2016 by the artist R. Dubois. It is a new media portrait, and in a moment we'll have an opportunity to see a clip of the portrait. DeRay McKesson is an alumnus of Bowdoin College, a member of the class of 2006, and I'm delighted to say that he will be recognized for his work this coming May at the upcoming 2021, graduation, when he is awarded an honorary doctorate for the extraordinary work he has done as one of the founders of Black Lives Matters. Part of what makes this portrait of DeRay so meaningful to me is that the 32 questions that are referenced in the title of the work were actually generated by Bowdoin students. And I just want to acknowledge the lead that was taken by Daniel Meja Cruz of the class of 2016, who was then president of the Bowdoin Student Government, and Ashley Bamboka, who in 2016 was the member of the class of 2016, who was then the president of the Bowdoin African American Society. And Danny and Ashley had actually interviewed DeRay not long before this portrait was made. And so there are many ways in which Bowdoin students themselves provided a critical pathway into the thinking that made this portrait possible. As you look at this still on the screen, I'm sure that you've already noticed that we don't only see a representation of DeRay McKesson. We also see words that are appearing on either side of the screen. And this has to do with the discursive structure of the portrait as Luc Dubois conceived it. I mentioned that these 32 questions were generated by our students. And as one observes the portrait, those questions come up almost like title cards, and DeRay then responds to them. And what Luc Dubois then did based on that footage was to go in and to tag each of the segments and to identify really a series of terms that serve as an index for topics that DeRay is touching on in the course of the comments he made in 2016, just a couple of years after Black Lives Matter had been established. And those subject titles are then linked to topics that are treated in DeRay McKesson's Twitter feed. And as everybody knows, one of DeRay's tools of choice for communicating with his followers is Twitter. I think he's very conscious of the ways in which 21st century tools provide new ways to reach out to activists and to empower them. And so topics referenced in the 2016 conversation with DeRay are linked to his Twitter feed, and the portrait is then in turn generative. So there is this very important way in which DeRay's comments are refreshed in terms of their ongoing significance with respect to issues he is tackling in the here and now. And we are grateful to Luc for not only being a very gifted visual artist, but for being a very talented computer scientist as well, which is part and parcel of this hybrid identity that Luc brings forward. As many of you may know, DeRay began his professional career as a teacher, and the values of education remain part and parcel of his career as an activist. I think it's part and parcel of what he understands to be the power of communication. And as the short clip I will show you in a second reveals, it also touches upon his understanding of the power of hope. And this is a message that I have definitely kept close to the heart over the past several months, it's one that I find inspiring and that I'd love to share with everybody who's gathered today. So Emily Junker, thank you for your help, and thank you for playing this short clip from 32 Questions for DeRay McKesson.
Yeah, you know, I think of hope as a belief that our tomorrows can be better than our todays. And that is just so real to me. I think some of it is because I grew up in a community of recovery and I saw that happen with real people every day. And also because I just won't accept that this is the best it can be. I can't accept that. I think teaching showed me kids who said that they were dumb, they didn't know math, they couldn't learn. And by the end, they're crying in the hallway because they got the highest on the test, or, you know, aced this project. Or I've seen people fall in love with their minds, those same minds that they didn't think were worth anything. So I'm a hope guy because I've seen its power.
Thank you so much, Emily.
Great, thank you, Anne, and thank everybody for all those choices, just showing, I think, you know, how much all of our museums are so different, and all the work that we do to serve all the communities here in Maine and all those who visit Maine. One of the things that the group got together to talk about questions and what we wanted this series to be about was about the notion of home. And part of it in the dialogue that we had among ourselves as a director was, you know, what does home feel like at our museum? But who have we made welcome in that home? And what does that home look like? And who was that home constructed for? You know, what actually is welcoming to one person might not be to another person. And so we decided to think about that notion of home. So the first question I was gonna throw out to the panelists is, what qualities must exist in order to feel at home? How can those translate into a museum? Amanda, do you mind taking a stab at it? I'll throw it at you one more time. What qualities must exist in order to quote unquote feel at home? How can those translate into a museum? And what's your kind of impression of home and your home at the Ogunquit Museum of American Art?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And actually I'm gonna preface it with two different quotes, because I'm a student of the 18th century initially, and in 1759, the British Museum opened its doors to the public, and it's an Enlightenment museum, and just like Bowdoin's museum, and they opened for, quote, the improvement, knowledge, and information of all persons, end quote. So that's 1759, and then for whatever reason, I fast forward 200 plus years to 1980 to a very famous essay that any student of museums has very likely encountered by Duncan and Wallach, called the Universal Survey Museum. And you know this essay. It's in a lot of technologies. You know, it's older at this point now, but you know, they sort of brought up this this notion that, well, actually what museums tend to say to a lot of people is that, you know, you're not welcome here, and this isn't a place for you to come, and, you know, stay out. And so I don't want to comment on either one of these. I'm just you know, taking note of this idea, you know, 1759, this idea that we could have something for all people, and you know, and then here we are in 2021 with, you know, social reckoning and you know, this moment. So clearly, you know, we have some work to do. And one of the things that I keep coming back to is this idea of perseverance and reflection, where you just, you know, you can't ever stop and say, well, you know, we did it, you know, we have this great series coming up actually at OMA, where we're trying to do better with our community and do more. And so it's called Community Artfulness. It's a new series of programs or a few lectures. We're doing yoga for the first time, you know, trying to get people to feel comfortable, right? And I think, Mark, you said this well, where, you know, people don't react in the same way. So if you really want to be you know, say, oh, you're welcome here, and you do something, and a lot of people say, oh, I feel welcome, but then others don't. The semiotic instability of, and I know that probably sounds, that's a little techie, but the openness of the sign, right? We can't we can't choose how people are going to react to what we do. We have to understand that there are different ways of interpreting the same thing. Like the Alberto Rey fish, I could see someone coming to that exhibit and saying, oh, that was an exhibit about fish. And someone else saying, oh, that was an exhibit about how we need to do better with our sustainability. And how, you know, and both people would be right. You know, and it's not that the museum or myself or the labels or anything, you know, picked that because we don't have control over that. And so, you know, I guess all this is to say, you know, we have these ideals and we just have to keep working until, you know, until we get it right. And it's a harder position to take because I would love to say, oh, we got it, you know, community artfulness 2021, nailed it, we're done, you know, and of course that's not how it's going to be. We're going to make some mistakes. We're going to have to reevaluate. We're trying to reach more audiences, grow our footprint, but we're also trying to, you know, attend to the folks that we have, our core supporters. There were 3 docents in our kitchen earlier today working on virtual tours for the first time. And these are dedicated, you know, people who are here of their own, you know, because they're excited about the museum. They love the history of the art colonies. They want to share that with people. And that was just so exciting, you know, to have some community buzz. But you know, perseverance is really a key word there. You know, you just can't give up, and you have to keep trying, you know, asking yourself, how do you do better? And understanding that there's, you know, semiotic instability in whatever you do. So I hope that term is okay.
No, that's great. Thank you, Amanda. And it's so great to hear your voice because I think, you know, you're also relatively new, and it's great to have your voice and sharing your thoughts about Ogunquit and where's Ogunquit going. This is part of this conversation. So I just love hearing your like energy and excitement and language about what's coming. So I can't wait for when you open. You know, Chris, I might turn kind of that same question to you a little bit. I don't want to over contextualize it, but as one of the, you know, flag bearers of the, you know, of a museum that has actually gone through a decolonizing process. And that word is actually, I think in the last few years since you all went through the process, has been really gained more baggage than it had before. And I don't know if being at home or a home in relation to that decolonization, if you want to talk a little bit about that, but if you want to go somewhere else with it, you can also talk about your home if you want.
No, I'll stick with the question mark because it's such a good one. You know, because as you know, the 1 year now director of the Abbe Museum, one of the questions, especially as the first Wabanaki year and first Passamaquoddy to lead this particular museum, which focuses on Wabanaki culture, arts, and histories, and has since it opened in 1928, is how do I make the Abbe Museum feel like a home away from home for Wabanaki peoples? Because I mean, the truth is that the Abbe Museum is located in what we call Bar Harbor, but that is Wabanaki homelands. Moneskadig, that's what we call Bar Harbor in Passamaquoddy, which is the place where the clams are dug. And if you go behind La Rochelle Mansion, low tide, pretty accurate description of the territory. So, you know, once again, you know, there's a history to the land that goes back 12,000 years, but museums are colonial artifacts. Preserving histories, you know, in this way, you know, is something that came over with colonization, and therefore museums, you know, for generations, you know, since their inception in the 19th century in America, have been basically unwelcome spaces for Native people. I mean, there's a reason why my father's generation and before would not even walk into or work in a museum, and that's because of harmful practices of you know, preserving histories the way colonial museums have, and that would include the, you know, keeping of funerary objects or human remains within the museum walls. You know, my father's generation would not walk into a building that has that type of situation going on. So, you know, it's a decolonization or decolonizing museums is really about turning that corner into how do we undo these harmful practices. And yes, the Abbe has been going under a process, and this is ongoing. We have not finished this process, and this will continue because we are a colonial museum. We always will be. So that means that we always have some way to look at ourselves and undo these things. And one of the ways we do that is that question of how do we make the Abbe Museum feel like a home? You know, not just to the Bar Harbor residents who we serve here on the island, but to Wabanaki peoples as they walk in the doors, you know, and one of the ways to do that is through language. And that's one of the reasons why I brought that book up first, is because it really fits well. And so, you know, some of the future things that I would look to do is, you know, kind of normalize in your visit to the Abbe Museum that English is a foreign language to this land. Our languages are actually the accurate descriptors of the landscape, you know, and the history of this land that goes back 12,000 years. And, you know, I look to do things like changing the bathroom signs, you know, from saying, you know, we'll keep the international signs so people don't walk into the wrong ones, but rather than it say men and women in the English language, it'll say skidabig and epijig, you know, so that as people visit the Abbe Museum, you know, Wabanaki or not, they end up having to learn a little bit of our languages to navigate the space. And by the presence of our languages being in the museum, to Wabanaki visitors as they walk in, that is right away a sign of welcoming and home. You know, and those are the small, they seem small, but they're actually very impactful, you know, to especially the Wabanaki visitors that are coming through, but even to non-native visitors that would come to our museum to actually see the centering of the information, you know, through the voices of the Wabanaki communities rather than through museum sciences, which is how it's traditionally been done.
Great, thank you so much, Chris. And do we know when you're going to open, Chris? Just so I got a shout out. Just, have you guys figured out what your plan is yet?
We don't have an exact date yet.
Okay.
We're still remaining closed. We are in a position where we're going to hold off until vaccinations occur for the staff. They all want to get vaccinated, so we decided to wait until then. So likely early summer, you know, but I'm not going to put an exact date on it.
We can't wait to see you actually in the museum. You've been there a year with it open with you, like at the front door. Do you want to share a little bit of just quickly about Market Day? Because I know that's coming up and that was very successful when you arrived last year. And I know more people should know about it because it's such a great thing. And you all took it digital, which is kind of phenomenal because you did it in like 6 weeks.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. Yeah, the Abbe Museum Indian Market, we're going to be once again holding it virtually. So it'll be Digital Abbe Museum Indian Market 2021. You know, it's the date of it is May, and the thought of an event that might draw 5,000 people is likely not possible yet at that time. So, you know, we have, of course, been growing this market over the last couple of years. And when we had to cancel it last year, the live event, we knew that all of the Wabanaki artists are involved, and the non-Wabanaki, there's other tribes, there's artists from all over the country, native artists from US and Canada. We knew all of them were experiencing a severe financial loss. You know, basically all of their income for the upcoming year, presentations, markets, all of that had disappeared. And so we put a lot of thought into it, but we decided to try something a little crazy and it was actually less than 4 weeks. We made the choice to have an online event in place of the virtual market where we could center and host the artists directly in their homes coming through, you know, through Zoom and broadcast it on Zoom, Facebook Live, and YouTube Live as a way, you know, it serves the Abbe's mission in that, you know, people got first-person education from the artists themselves and got to hear their life stories about their art. But, you know, for the artists, it gave them an opportunity to show what the quality of their art, what they have for sale, and let people know where they were. And it was the very first virtual Indian market to occur, and several other museums ended up coming to us and asking, how did you do it? You know, because when we did it, it was a bit of a crazy decision because we decided, you know, to advertise 6 hours of content without yet having 6 hours of content booked. So there was a big risk. However, there was also a big reward, not just for the museum, but for the artists.
Great, thanks, Chris, for sharing that. And everybody, you know, go to their website, find out when it is. It's such an exciting moment for the Wabanaki community as well as the state of Maine and all of those across the country are internationally able to access it. So, Jen, I'm going to follow up with a question, you know, with you. You know, Monhegan is such a special place, and you've lived there for a long time. So I'm going to ask you, what have you learned from communities that have informed your work? So I'll say it again. What have you learned from communities that have informed your work?
Thanks, Mark. For Monhegan, I think a lot of what our museum is about is power of place. And so what the community means to us here, it doesn't just mean the people who've lived on Monhegan or the artists who visited Monhegan. The community is the people who are inspired by and interested in knowing more and being a part of this place. And so everything we do, whether it's about the history or the art that's been inspired, it all comes back to why were they here? Whether we're looking at the Wabanaki peoples or whether we're looking at George Bellows, or, there was something that brought everybody here. And for some people, it's the fishery. And for some people, it's the dramatic scenery. For some people, it's to stand on Lighthouse Hill where other people have painted and be part of an art workshop. But we need to be constantly looking at how that community is changing and reinterpreting the people that have been here before, and not just go with the interpretation as it's always stood. And so that's part of our work right now.
Great, thanks so much, Jen. We're getting a whole lot of questions in the Q&A. So, and some of them are pretty similar to the questions that we thought of putting together. So it's always fun to create the dialogue with our audiences. And it looks like we've got, over 100 folks on this. So thank you again all for joining us. I might start with a harder one because these are hard times, and take a, I've got here from one question we have for the panel is many museums have let go their museum educators. So the question is, what is the status at your museum for museum educators? Does anybody want to grab that? I don't want to call anybody out, but I'll start just to give a little. The PMA, at least we have not let go of any of our museum educators. We're quite proud. There's no question that in this environment that some of the educators in our museum world, I would say a few of us, many of us are very disappointed that if you're really seriously thinking about diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility, that educators are really your link to that. And many museums, unfortunately, for financial reasons probably, but I would say not necessarily justifiable, have really shot themselves in the foot in this area and have not been leaders in our communities. But at our institution, we've been very proud to hold on to our educators because they've been creating the digital content, with our curators. That was like our strong suit. That was the last people we were going to lose in serving our community. But I see, Anne, you're off mute. Do you want to share out?
Oh, sure. Education, I think, is such a critical component of what museums offer. And I think at Bowdoin, that's certainly incredibly important to us. And one of the things that's been, in fact, very heartening during the course of the pandemic has been the really strong engagement of museum collections by students and faculty. And I think the ways in which actually the museum does feel like something of a home, and that it provides students, I think, with something of a portal into communities and time periods that may be very far from the present place where they find themselves. And one of the things that we've had a lot of success with, and this sort of comes to this larger question of communication, is working with students in the curation of our exhibitions. And so we're really pleased, for example, that couple of exhibitions that we currently have on view. One, The Presence of the Past, Art from Central and West Africa, was curated through a class that worked with Professor David Gordon, and New Views of the Middle Ages, highlights from the Wyvern collection, on which tons of original research was done by students working in tandem with Professor Kate Geary. So I think that it is incumbent upon us to help new generations find their stories in our museums, to find the places where they feel at home, and to help them educate us, in fact, about how we can be relevant to upcoming generations as well as other members of our community. So here for education.
Great, thanks, Anne. Anybody else on the panel want to grab that, or should I move on? Chris, hey, go ahead.
Yeah, I'll jump in real quick. As somebody with a museum education background, I arrived at the Abbe, and then 2 weeks later we had to close the doors. And we're a small museum, a small crew, and one of the things that I put on to top of my priority list is making sure that we don't lose any of the team members during the closure. Didn't know how it was going to happen at first. We were able to work our way through it, and I definitely wanted to make sure that the museum education team would not be furloughed, have to take time off or anything like that, because there is a lot of value. Number one, I knew that we would be converting ourselves to the virtual realm. We didn't know how long the pandemic would last, so I just planned that this was going to go go on until it was done, and just went from there. And as somebody that was, education supervisor at a large museum and oversaw in my time, the group experience for over 70,000 guests, I know that educators are not just valuable in the education that they provide and the content that they create, but they are also one of your best income streams. And I knew that if we could convert our educational programs to fit the public school, reality of remote learning, then we could, even with the doors closed, open up new streams of income. So there's a practical sense as well. So it's not just just how strongly I felt about it, but there was actually some practicality, to keeping museum educators, and that's just my comes from my experience in this particular section of the museum field.
Great, thanks, Chris. Amanda, you want to hop in?
Yeah, Chris, I had exactly the same instinct when I arrived at OMA right as the pandemic was starting, and I said I don't want to have to let go any staff because of this. And we also it was a little scary there for a while, but we made it through, and we did really well, and I feel really good about that looking back in 2020. I mean, it was really hard, but we don't have a proper curator of education at OMA. But I can tell you what we've just changed some job descriptions around, and I have a very talented employee, Nicole Bianco, who was, her title was something like, office manager, a gallery manager, this sort of thing. But, I said, what do you want? What do we need? And so her new title is engagement. She's an engagement manager, and trying to bring, this outward focus to the community and to some of those job titles. And she's the one who's organized the Artfulness, which includes a lot of classes, mindful sketching, programs for kids in different age groups. So we've got those younger kids, the middle-aged kids, trying to think broadly about, the scale of age, because that's another kind of diversity, right? Age diversity. So what are you looking to your smallest people and to your oldest people? So that's been meaningful for me, is to really think more about engagement. And we also have, we're doing those virtual tours, as I mentioned, as well as the regular in-person tours. So, we are moving forward with education in the more traditional sense of the classes.
Great. Thanks so much, Amanda. I'm going to pop back to some of our questions, and then we'll go back to one of our live questions. For the panel, how do you think the museum field is shifting? And in your opinion, what about the museum field needs to change to move forward? I kind of open it up to whoever wants to jump in, because how do you think the museum field is shifting? And in your opinion, what about the museum field needs to change to move forward?
Mark, I'd be happy to start the ball rolling.
Go for it, Ann. Sure.
I'm excited.
I think we're all happy to have you start.
Well, but really I want to start it because I want to get the ball rolling so that others can jump in. But in a way, I think your question about how the museum field has changed actually meshes really well with a question from Elizabeth Jones about how leadership has changed over the past year. And I would say that from my standpoint, one of the biggest changes is a mindset shift, in that over the course of the past year, I think it became clear that nobody had the answers, that we were living in a state of such profound uncertainty and such dramatic changes that it was clear nobody operating by themselves could get through this alone. And from my standpoint, one of the most exciting things that has happened over the course of the past year is that we have all been forced to acknowledge the extraordinary vulnerability of each of us as individuals, but at the same time, the profound strength we have as communities. And so I think one of the most exciting things is that all of us have agreed that we need to develop new strategies for reaching out to our communities. And this evening's program is such an important part of that. That's why it's so much fun to hear feedback from the audience. We recognize, and I think this is a profound shift from the perspective that Amanda presented from the 18th century at the outset of this program. I think in the 18th century, and this goes along with Chris's comments about a colonial mindset, there was a way in which individuals who were founding museums or cultural institutions went into it with the perspective that they knew it was best and that they were going to educate those who didn't know enough to appreciate fine objects. And I think what we have recognized today is actually we need to learn from our communities if our institutions are going to continue to represent the stories that capture the heritage that museums are called upon to pass from generation to generation. And for us, one of the outcomes of this period of time has been developing an anti-racism action plan, recognizing that we do have a colonial foundation on which we build, and that it is absolutely incumbent upon us to educate ourselves about critical issues that are unfolding around us, to develop strategic plans for rethinking how we make our museum a safe and welcoming place, and above all, how we are communicating. So sort of a broad answer, but I think a really important question. And I'm sure that my colleagues have thoughts on that as well.
Anybody else want to chime in? Again, you know, how do you think the museum field is shifting? And in your opinion, what does it need to do to move forward, as Anne just suggested?
So yeah, I work with a partnership called Agama Educational Initiative, and a lot of the work that we do is with many of the museums in the Northeast, including some of the larger museums in Boston. And I'm really starting to see a shift in the Northeast, especially with museums grappling with their own difficult histories. You know, you know, a place like Revolutionary Spaces, which runs the sites of the Massachusetts Old State House and the Old South Meeting House, of course, have been telling a very, you know, glorified, you know, story of, you know, the creation of the country and, you know, the document signing that happened there. But in the Massachusetts Old State House, also in that space was documents were signed, like the Phipps Bounty Proclamation, which was, you know, for bounties for Penobscot men, women, and children back in the 18th century. And talking about that history, that very real history, but also very difficult history, is something that they are willing and open and are working actively towards addressing, making sure that we're telling not just the good and the you know, the fairy tale version of our own history of ourselves, but we're telling the good, the bad, and the ugly, so that we as human beings can learn from our history and then do better as human beings going forward. And that is something that is monumental, because in my father's generation, I can remember him being invited to the Peabody at Harvard. And just like I am, you know, he was extremely critical of the way, you know, Native objects were on display, and the way that they did things back then. And in his time period, you know, having him there was kind of, you know, a special thing. You know, you never had a Native person actually observe and give you feedback, and the feedback was taken, and the museum science would prevail. You know, this is not the way museums are done. We're not going to pay attention to this. So that was 50 years ago. And now here we are in the 2020s. And finally, this momentum has shifted where somebody like myself can go into a Boston museum, can be critical of that museum space and the way they display Native art. And they listen. And they are making active changes currently right now. And that is monumental in my mind. You know, I always talk about it as it's like turning an aircraft carrier when it comes to some of these museums, especially the larger ones. It takes a long time. There's a lot of effort that has to go into it, but, and it's multi-generational. And that's another thing I've learned, you know, because my father was saying these things back in Boston back in the 70s. And so you have to be able to willing to stay the course, because it's really not just about ourselves and about the here and now, but about the children that we're in the world that we're bringing them into. And especially for Native people in the museum world, it's really, you know, the trauma is intergenerational. Undoing that trauma is going to take multiple generations as well. And I do see momentum, and I'm very, very excited to see that.
Thanks, Chris. Anybody else want to give that one a go? All right, and then I'll move on, take a look at the questions we have over here. We've got one that's asking, docents are persevering. So maybe this is for you, Amanda. Waiting an opportunity to return to serving museum audiences. are these museums, I guess us, planning to return to volunteer guides? You want to grab that one, Amanda?
Yeah, so part of our COVID guidelines is that everyone has to feel comfortable with what they do in the museum, and that applies to docents as well. And so we've had some docents who have said, you know, I'm not comfortable, and so they've not participated in the in-person things. But then we have some who are comfortable, who wear a mask, like the three who were here today. You know, they were socially distanced at this very large table, and they had their masks on. So you know, I think it's a matter of personal comfort level, and there's more comfort level with the tours that are outside here at Elma, and so we did do outside tours, and we will be continuing with those again. But the in-person docent tours are a harder question, and so we haven't been doing those. And I don't actually have an answer for when those might start again, but it's, you know, you want to give enough personal freedom, but also encourage people to, you know, to protect themselves. So we're trying to find that balance and listen to what people's individual comfort levels are. So I hope that answers the question.
Yep, thanks, Amanda. Anybody else want to share on that one? All right, then I'm going to keep going down our list. Oh, sorry, go ahead, Jen.
That's okay. I just wanted to, you know, say on Monhegan, we rely really heavily on volunteers. That's part of our museum. That's how we stay connected with the community. We have 150 volunteers every year. That's who greet you at the door. And so we've missed them terribly. And this summer, those that are comfortable, that are vaccinated, that are masked, and we're going to start phasing them back in. And so we're really excited to have them back.
Great, thanks so much, Jen. Let's see, going down the list here, there's a shout out to Amanda. A couple of shout outs to some of the directors, some personal stuff, thank you. It's a little bit of a comment, but it might lead to some of our conversation. There's a long history of visitor experience philosophy, interpretation strategies to make galleries feel more welcoming, comma, comma, comma. So I think that's maybe a question of maybe are there things tying into our conversation that COVID or the social justice movement, are we all or any of us thinking very different about the museum experience for visitors?
Mark, I think one of the things I might say is that I think COVID has given us an opportunity to reimagine our world anew. And I think the events of the past several months, of course, this has a history that is much longer and deeper, but especially what we witnessed in Minneapolis with the murder of George Floyd, and of course, this horrible reminder of ongoing violence that we had last week in Atlanta. I think all of us recognize that not only is there an invitation to reimagine how we do business, but there's an urgency to reimagine how we think about what it means to be welcome. And from my own standpoint, I think one of the most important things for all of us to do is to find ways to surface assumptions we may not even know we have. The Bowdoin College Museum of Art, for example, is open free of charge, and we're thrilled to be free of charge. We're thrilled that Bowdoin is able to make that possible. That's a message that we want to get out to people. We want to do more in terms of engaging in dialogue with our visitors about how we can make the museum even more welcoming. Does that mean rethinking the way in which our guards, for example, are outfitted? Does that mean that we rethink something as basic as changing the font of the labels to make the labels easier to read? Does that mean, and I think Chris's point about language is so powerful, does that mean thinking anew about trying to provide multilingual experience? So I do feel that we have an invitation and indeed an imperative to rethink everything, and we can't do that without our visitors. And so suggestions are very welcome in that regard.
Thanks, Ann. I really appreciate that. And I agree with you 100%. You know, at the PMA, a couple of things we've done in the middle of the virus and even when we were closed was it has to do with the experience, because you've got to change your structure so you can change your experience. So for other people was that our traditional education department, which was fantastic, is now the learning and community collaboration, area. So it's learning and community collaboration. So it's thinking about our experiences outside of the museum. So for many of the PMA, we're really starting to think outside of our walls and try to think outside of that closed structure, which has had certainly colonial structures of systemic racism embedded in it. And maybe the way to try to unfold those and reveal them, acknowledge, and then try to heal is to get out of our own space a little bit more. And how do we get out? And we all know the hard part is it's very expensive to get out of your museum. But it's actually, I think it's our survival in many ways if we don't get out of our own space, at least some of us in museums that are more traditional. The other, I agree with you, I think we did a shift, and we used to have the Department of Protection Services, and we changed that to the Department of Experience and Safety. And they have different uniforms. And we were realizing and hearing from data that, you know, particularly visitors of color across the country were coming to museums and not comfortable because of the kind of policing structure in museums that they have perpetuated from the police industry. And this is our community's art, so why should they feel intimidated? We want them to be as safe as possible to enjoy their art because it's theirs. Who are we really protecting it from? We obviously want it to be safe to make sure that it's safe. But at the same time, you know, the risk is pretty small, even though when something happens, it's horrible. But how do you rethink your structure so that that experience is different for visitors? Mm-hmm. Sorry, I talked a little bit too long on that one. Anybody else have any thoughts about how COVID and the social justice movement has shifted the way in which you think about your visitor experience?
You know, Mark, if you don't mind, one thing that I find very exciting is even tonight, this program represents a profound rethinking of the visitor experience. And it's exciting to me that one of the silver linings of COVID is that we have developed new communication structures. And those, I think, allow us to decenter in some ways the traditional power, if you will, of the museum as a dominant institution, and to share responsibility for how we think about culture, how we can collaborate with one another. And I love the fact that as we explore home, people are able to tune in and think about cultural institutions from their own homes or places that are safe places for them. So I think the sky's the limit in terms of reimagining what we can do.
I think you're absolutely right. Well, thank you, Anne. We got a few more minutes and I got a couple of other questions I want to grab here. Jen, this one's specifically for you. So many artists go to Monhegan to paint, attend workshops. Does the museum connect with those artists, or do you offer opportunities for artists to work with the museum?
Well, we have an unusual policy on Monhegan, which Mark's nodding, he knows our policy. We do not show the work of living artists because it was a forward-thinking policy when they created the museum that it would eventually cause conflict. So while we don't show living artists, we're definitely open to living artists. We welcome workshops and groups into the galleries. Artists often work with us on our events, but we don't offer specific workshops ourselves or do anything to promote an individual artist, but we are open to all of them. So if you're asking this question because you're part of a workshop or anything, please do reach out to us and we'll do our best to accommodate you.
Thanks, Jen. I think you've been asked that question before because it's an interesting policy, but it is there for a reason. You know, you want to keep the artists all happy who are on the island, and it's hard to make choices. And if on a small island, I know sometimes when we've had juried exhibitions, it's hard for me to go to, you know, the co-op with my family because artists are finding out how you made your choices because we have such a caring community of artists and always wanted to know how we make our choices. So there's a couple of other questions in there, a couple of really nice shout outs. I wish I could read these, but I want to thank Sadie and Dina for their really kind comments in here about our museums and also about the PMA. And I think we had a question about foreseeing the effect of the pandemic on the museum trail in general. I would say, you know, we survived. I'm going to kind of talk a little bit for all of us. It's been a heck of a year. We are stressed out. We're ready to open because I think that actually might be more relaxing. We do not stop working. It's weird how much we've been working and certainly taking care of our staffs and our finances and trying to think about programming and try to be thinking about where we're headed. I would say the one thing from our conversations with these folks and other meetings we've had all winter, it's about listening. You know, if there's one thing learning from this moment and learning about what we might be offering about our institutions, we need to listen to those communities who might not think of our museums as their home. And I think Chris spoke very well and very to that point. You know, we have been in many ways, some of our institutions, not naming any names, but really looking at a single audience or the audience that supports the museum. And we have to think well beyond that. It's different. Instead of trying to be, as Lonnie Bunch, the head of the Smithsonian, says, you don't want to be a community center, you want to be the center of the community. And so what are the things you have to do that? And that's really taking down the structures to create new structures so everyone feels like each of our museum is home. And it's not going to be easy. So I hope you all will be patient with us as we go down this path, but we're all becoming better listeners. And we cannot thank our community, particularly here in Maine, and our visitors and our summer residents who love these museums. We probably wouldn't have gotten through the winter without your philanthropy, without your care, without your letters, your texts. You all made us survive this. And so as we kind of end this a little bit choked up again, it is because of our visitors in this amazing community. There are very few organizations like this in any state or region to have, you know, 9 museums this close to each other. The best thing about the Maine Art Museum Trail is if Jen has a great show in Monhegan or Amanda at Ogunquit, that means I get more visitors at the PMA and Ann gets more visitors, you know, in Brunswick. And if Colby has a great show, that means they're going to show up at the Abbe. If the Abbe has great shows, they're going to come down to Monhegan. We all feed each other. We don't compete. We wish we could all be free, Ann. We can't afford it yet. We're trying to be as free as we can. You know, we're on that track. We would like to be, but some of us don't have that financial structure, but a lot of us are free. And that's an amazing gift to our community, that the colleges in particular that have that structure and make themselves free to our communities. And the rest of us do our best when we can to be free and finding ways to be sure no one's left out. So I always do not like being the last word. Do any of the other directors want to say goodbye or share something or some excitement about an upcoming show before we head out?
I might just mention that one of the other silver linings for us of the pandemic has been the fact that we can bring in international visitors from around the world to help us better understand our collections. And so I hope people will be able to tune in this coming month in April when we have visitors from Iraq and from Cameroon, artists and cultural leaders. Please visit our website to learn more. And again, I just want to reiterate Mark's thanks to our fellow colleagues, but also to everybody who's joined us this evening and for your comments and your support. We appreciate it so much. And I know we all can't wait to see you back in person, and also look forward to seeing you online in the meantime.
Yeah, thank you, Mark, so much. This is great. And I'm just so pleased that we're part of this. You know, this is a community. The Maine Art Museum Trail is a community, and knowing that we can all support each other and that we're working towards a common goal, I think is really important, and that we can connect, just like, you know, just looking at your faces, you know, I feel good about where museums are headed in Maine. I do.
Chris, Jen, anything last? Are you good?
Just a shout out to all my fellow Museum Art Trail directors here, and all of your staffs and everybody for, you know, it's been a trying year, of course, but, you know, the future is bright, and that's the great part. I always talk about, you know, like a lot of people have enjoyed what we've done at the Abbe with the doors closed. I always tell people, wait till we do open the doors and what we can do then. So, you know, looking forward to seeing you in the future.
Thank you, Chris. And Jen, you want to end with telling us when you open and what your show is, so we can all get psyched to go to Monhegan, you know, when we can.
Right. So yeah, get ready to come to Monhegan. It always looks like the background. So we're opening June 24th. We're opening the Keeper's House, and we're opening the Rockwell Kent James Fitzgerald home and studio. And then July 1st, we're opening our art gallery. And the show this summer is called Cape and Island Vistas, Contrasted New England Art Colonies. And that was curated by one of our trustees, Jim O'Gorman. And it is all artists who worked or lived both on Monhegan and Cape Ann, Massachusetts. And there are 24 artists in the show, and there's one work from each location. And that'll be on Monhegan all summer, and then it's going to Cape Ann Museum in Gloucester next fall. So Don't miss it.
Thanks, Jen. Great way to end. Thank you all panelists, and thanks everybody for coming. Have a wonderful night.